Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Foundation of Power. Rich Hudson stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, overlooking the sprawling city that had once seemed impossible to conquer. At 45, he commanded respect through more than just his estimated net worth of $800 million. His steel-gray eyes held the cold calculation of a man who had clawed his way from the Detroit slums to the pinnacle of American business, leaving a trail of crushed competitors and settled scores in his wake. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Hudson, your wife called. She's running late for dinner tonight." Rich's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Miranda had been running late frequently over the past 6 months. He'd built his empire on reading people, on detecting weakness and deception before others even recognized it in themselves. The signs were there: the new perfume, the secretive phone calls, the sudden interest in yoga classes that seemed to run unusually long. Rich Hudson wasn't a man who had achieved his position through trust or forgiveness. Born Richard Eugene Hudson in a crack house to a mother who overdosed when he was 12, he learned early that survival meant being 3 steps ahead of everyone else. By 16, he was running numbers for local bookies. By 25, he owned the bookies. By 35, he'd legitimized enough of his operations to marry Miranda Foster, a socialite whose family's old money had long since evaporated. But legitimacy was just a veneer. Rich maintained connections that spanned from Wall Street boardrooms to back-alley enforcers. His legitimate businesses, construction, waste management, and shipping, provided perfect cover for the shadow empire that had made him truly untouchable. He'd survived 3 federal investigations, 2 assassination attempts, and countless business rivals who'd underestimated the quiet man with the accounting degree and the memory of an elephant. The marriage to Miranda had been strategic initially. Her connections opened doors that money alone couldn't unlock. But somewhere along the way, he'd made the mistake of actually caring for her. Rich Hudson never made the same mistake twice. His phone rang. Benjamin Williamson, who owned half the restaurants in the city and owed his continued prosperity to Rich's silent partnership in his ventures, was calling about their mutual friend, Oliver Clark. "Rich, you need to know something about Oliver." Benjamin's voice was strained. "He's been asking questions about your shipping schedules, your warehouse locations. Says he's thinking about investing, but..." Rich closed his eyes. Oliver Clark, Miranda's yoga instructor. The pieces fell into place with the satisfying click of a loaded gun. "Thank you, Benjamin. I'll handle this." Rich hung up and walked to his wall safe, removing a leather-bound notebook filled with names, addresses, and detailed information about everyone who had ever crossed his path. Oliver Clark's entry was thin, for now. Rich began making calls. By evening, he knew everything. Oliver Clark, 32, former male model turned fitness instructor. Currently sleeping with 3 married clients, including Rich's wife. Living beyond his means in a downtown loft. Driving a leased BMW. And, most interestingly, desperately in debt to some very unsavory people. Rich smiled for the first time in months. When someone betrayed Rich Hudson, they didn't just lose, they learned why crossing him was the last mistake they'd ever make. Chapter 2. The Trap Springs. Rich chose Chez Laurent, Benjamin Williamson's flagship restaurant, for dinner with Miranda. She arrived 20 minutes late, her cheeks flushed and her hair slightly mussed despite her attempts to fix it in the car. "Sorry, honey. Traffic was murder," she lied smoothly, sliding into the booth across from him. Rich studied his wife of 10 years. Miranda was still beautiful at 38, her auburn hair and green eyes turning heads wherever she went. But Rich could see the guilt in the way she wouldn't quite meet his gaze, the nervous energy in her fidgeting hands. "How was yoga?" he asked casually, cutting into his steak. "Oh, challenging. Oliver really pushes us hard." The slight flush in her cheeks when she said the name confirmed everything Rich needed to know. "I've been thinking we should take a vacation. Maybe Tuscany? You always loved it there." Miranda's smile faltered. I can't take time off right now. The charity committee needs me for the spring gala." Another lie. Rich had already confirmed that the spring gala had been moved to autumn months ago. Of course, Rich nodded. "Well, Maybe Oliver could recommend some exercises I could do to stay in shape while you're busy. Miranda's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. What? Your yoga instructor? Oliver Clark, right? I was thinking of hiring a personal trainer. No. He's very selective about his clients. Probably wouldn't be a good fit. Miranda's voice had gone up an octave. Rich's phone buzzed with a text from one of his associates. Package delivered to, Clark's apartment. He's in position. Excuse me, darling. I need to use the restroom. Rich stood, but instead of heading to the bathroom, he walked toward the kitchen entrance where Benjamin Williamson was waiting. Everything ready? Rich asked quietly. My staff knows what to do. You sure about this, Rich? Rich's expression didn't change. When someone steals from me, they pay the price. This is just the opening act. Rich returned to find Miranda, checking her phone frantically. When she saw him approaching, she quickly put it away. Everything all right? Rich asked, sitting back down. Fine. Just checking on the committee. Miranda's hands were trembling slightly. Rich knew Oliver had just received photos of his apartment. Photos that showed it had been thoroughly searched, with certain items deliberately moved to let him know he'd been visited. Nothing was missing, but the message was clear. We can reach you anywhere. You know, Miranda, I've been thinking about our marriage lately. Miranda's face went pale. What about it? About trust. About loyalty. About what happens when someone breaks their vows. Before Miranda could respond, her phone rang. She glanced at it, and her face went white. I need to take this. By all means. Miranda stepped away from the table, her voice hushed but urgent. Rich could read her lips. What do you mean they were in your apartment? When she returned, Miranda was visibly shaken. Rich, I need to go. There's an emergency with my sister. Your sister's in Europe, Miranda. Has been for 3 weeks. The color drained completely from Miranda's face. She grabbed her purse and stood abruptly. I have to go. Sit down, Miranda. Something in Rich's voice made her freeze. It was the same tone he'd used when ordering the kneecaps broken of a contractor who'd try to shortchange him. Miranda slowly sat back down. Now, Rich said calmly, cutting another piece of steak, let's discuss Oliver Clark. Miranda's wine glass slipped from her fingers, red wine spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. Chapter 3. The Declaration of War. I don't know what you're talking about, Miranda whispered, but her entire body was shaking. Rich reached into his jacket and placed a manila envelope on the table. Photos from the Drake Hotel. March 15th, March 22nd, April 3rd. Should I continue? Miranda stared at the envelope without opening it, tears beginning to stream down her face. Around them, the restaurant continued its elegant dinner service, unaware of the quiet destruction happening in booth 12. Rich, please, let me explain. No. Rich's voice cut through her plea like a blade. Explanations are for people who make mistakes. You made a choice. Multiple choices. Every Tuesday and Thursday for 6 months. How long have you known? Long enough. Rich leaned back, his expression unreadable. Long enough to learn some very interesting things about your lover. Did you know Oliver Clark owes $300,000 to Mickey Gorman? Miranda's confusion was genuine. Who? A loan shark. Apparently, Oliver has a gambling problem. Poker, specifically. High-stakes games in the warehouse district. Mickey's been very patient, but patience has limits. Rich's phone buzzed with another text. This one made him smile coldly. Speaking of limits, Oliver's about to discover what happens when you cross the wrong person. Before Miranda could ask what he meant, shouting erupted from the kitchen area. Through the service windows, they could see staff members backing away from something near the rear entrance. Benjamin Williamson appeared at their table, his face grave. Rich, there's been an incident. Someone threw a drink at a customer near the back entrance. The customer is claiming assault. Rich stood smoothly. How unfortunate. Lead the way, Benjamin. Miranda grabbed his arm. Rich, don't. Don't what, Miranda? Don't protect my interests? Don't handle my business? Rich's eyes were ice cold. You've made your choice. Now live with the consequences. They followed Benjamin through the restaurant. Near the back entrance, Oliver Clark stood dripping with what appeared to be a mojito, his face flushed with rage and embarrassment. A young waitress cowered nearby, tears streaming down her face. He grabbed me, the waitress cried. I was just serving drinks, and he grabbed my arm. Oliver spun around, his eyes wild. She threw a drink on me. This is assault. The manager was already on his phone with the police. Oliver's eyes found Miranda in the crowd, and Rich watched his wife's face crumble as she realized the trap she'd walked into. I need to use my phone, Oliver demanded, pushing past the gathering crowd. Rich watched with cold satisfaction as Oliver sent a frantic text, undoubtedly to Miranda, begging her to help him, to call her lawyer, to do something. Miranda's phone buzzed, but she didn't dare look at it with Rich watching her every move. Within minutes, Benjamin Williamson disappeared toward the back of the restaurant. When he returned, he wasn't alone. The restaurant's true owner emerged from the kitchen, a man Miranda had never seen before, but whose presence commanded immediate attention from everyone in the room. Benjamin Williamson walked straight to Rich and nodded respectfully. Mr. Hudson. Oliver Clark's face went from flushed to ashen as he realized who had orchestrated this entire scene. The police officers who had just arrived seemed to hesitate, waiting for some signal. Rich walked slowly toward Oliver, stopping just close enough to speak quietly. You made a grave mistake, Oliver. What did you think was going to happen when you decided to steal from me? Oliver's mouth opened and closed without sound. Around them, the restaurant had gone completely silent. Miranda, Rich called without turning around. Come here. Miranda approached on unsteady legs, her face streaked with tears and mascara. Tell Oliver goodbye, Rich said calmly. You won't be seeing him again. Rich, please, Miranda began. The police are going to arrest Oliver for assault. Rich continued as if she hadn't spoken. He's going to spend the night in jail. Tomorrow, Mickey Gorman is going to come looking for his money. The day after that, Oliver's going to discover that his lease has been terminated, his gym has canceled his contract, and every other client he's been servicing has suddenly decided they no longer need his services. Rich finally turned to face his wife. As for you, Miranda, you're going to go home. You're going to pack a single suitcase with whatever you can fit inside it. Then you're going to check into a hotel and wait for my lawyer to contact you. Rich, our marriage ended the moment you spread your legs for this piece of trash. Rich's voice never rose above conversational level, but the words hit Miranda like physical blows. The only question now is how much you're going to lose in the process. As if on cue, the police officers moved forward to arrest Oliver. He looked desperately at Miranda, but she was staring at her husband in shock, finally understanding that the man she betrayed wasn't the forgiving type. Rich Hudson had built his empire on the principle that betrayal was a debt that had to be paid in full, with interest. And he always collected what was owed to him. The real punishment was just beginning. Chapter 4. The Network Activates. 3 days after the restaurant incident, Rich Hudson sat in his private office reviewing reports from his network of associates. Oliver Clark had been released on bail, but his world was systematically crumbling. Mickey Gorman had indeed come calling, and when Oliver couldn't produce the money, Mickey's associates had provided a physical reminder of his obligations. 3 broken ribs and a dislocated shoulder. Rich's phone rang. Mr. Hudson? This is Art Rios from Downtown Fitness. We need to discuss Oliver Clark's contract termination. What about it? He's threatening to sue. Says he has evidence of conspiracy, that someone's coordinating attacks against him. Rich smiled coldly. Oliver was smarter than he'd given him credit for. Unfortunately for Oliver, being smart and being able to prove something were 2 different things entirely. Let him sue. Make sure his lawyer understands that any litigation will result in a very thorough investigation of Mr. Clark's business practices. I'm sure the IRS would be interested in his cash payments from married clients. Understood, sir. Rich hung up and turned his attention to the surveillance reports on Miranda. She'd checked into the Marriott downtown and had barely left her room in 3 days. His investigators reported that she'd made dozens of phone calls to lawyers, to her friends, to her family. Most had gone unanswered. The door to his office opened without a knock, a privilege reserved for only 2 people. Hugh Holcomb entered, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the expression of a man who delivered unpleasant news professionally. Rich. Hugh had been Rich's fixer for 15 years, handling problems that required solutions outside the legal system. At 52, the former Special Forces operator had the build of a man who stayed in fighting shape and the dead eyes of someone who'd seen too much violence to be sure. Depends on your definition of good news. Hugh opened his briefcase and removed a thick file. Oliver Clark's debt situation is worse than we thought. Besides Mickey Gorman, he owes money to a cocaine dealer named Fernando Crawford and apparently has been skimming from 3 different clients' purses over the past year. Rich raised an eyebrow. Skimming. Small amounts. 20 here, 50 there. Enough to feed his gambling habit, but not enough for the wives to notice immediately. Until now. Now. Hugh smiled grimly. Funny thing about guilty consciences. Once word gets out that a man's been sleeping with married women, those same women start examining their finances more carefully. Patty Graham discovered $500 missing from her jewelry box. Stacy Finch is missing $800 from her household account. Rich leaned back in his chair. And they're pressing charges? As of this morning, yes. Turns out when women discover their boy toy has been stealing from them, they get vindictive. Hugh paused. There's more. Oliver's been taking photos. Rich's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. What kind of photos? The blackmail kind. Hidden cameras in his apartment. He's got recordings of at least 6 different women, including Miranda. Where are they now? That's the problem. Oliver's apartment was cleaned out yesterday. Professional job, cameras, computers, everything electronic. Gone. Rich was quiet for a long moment. Mickey. No. This was too clean for Mickey's crew. Someone else got there first. Rich's mind raced through possibilities. Oliver was desperate, which made him dangerous. A desperate man with compromising photos of wealthy married women could cause significant problems. Find him, Hugh. Find him and find those photos. Already on it. But Rich, there's something else you need to know about Miranda. Rich's attention sharpened. What? Hugh pulled out another file. She's been talking to Benjamin Williamson. The silence stretched between them. Benjamin Williamson owed his continued prosperity to Rich Hudson's backing. If Benjamin was communicating with Miranda behind Rich's back, what kind of talking? Phone calls. 3 of them in the past 2 days. Short conversations, but she called him directly, not through his office. Rich stood and walked to his window, looking out at the city he controlled through a web of relationships, debts, and fear. Benjamin Williamson had been useful, but usefulness had limits. Set up a meeting with Benjamin. Tonight. Where? The warehouse on 5th Street. The old one. Rich's voice carried a finality that made Hugh nod without asking questions. What about Miranda? Rich was quiet for a moment, remembering the woman he'd married, the woman he'd thought he could trust. Miranda made her choice. Now she gets to live with the consequences. All of them. As Hugh left to make arrangements, Rich opened his personal safe and removed a smaller box. Inside was a ring. Not Miranda's wedding ring, but a class ring from Oliver Clark's high school. Rich's people had acquired it from Oliver's apartment before it was cleaned out. Rich Hudson had learned long ago that revenge was most satisfying when it was personal. And this was about to become very personal indeed. Chapter 5, The Squeeze. Benjamin Williamson arrived at the 5th Street warehouse at midnight, as instructed. The building had been abandoned for 3 years, but Rich maintained ownership through a shell company. It was the perfect place for conversations that needed to remain private. Hugh Holcomb was waiting by the entrance, his presence making Benjamin visibly nervous. Mr. Hudson is inside, Hugh said simply, leading Benjamin through the maze of empty shipping containers and abandoned machinery. Rich stood in the center of the main floor, illuminated by a single hanging light. The dramatic setting was intentional. Rich had learned that environment could be just as intimidating as words. Benjamin, thank you for coming. Rich, I need to explain. No explanation necessary. Rich's voice echoed in the empty space. Miranda called you 3 times. You accepted her calls. That tells me everything I need to know about where your loyalties lie. Benjamin's face went pale. She was desperate, Rich. She just wanted to know if you were serious about the divorce. And what did you tell her? The truth. That you don't make idle threats. Benjamin swallowed hard. Rich, she's scared. Maybe you could. Could what? Forgive her? Take her back. Rich's laugh was devoid of humor. Benjamin, how long have we known each other? 15 years. In those 15 years, have you ever seen me forgive someone who betrayed me? Benjamin was quiet, remembering the contractor who tried to shortchange Rich and ended up in bankruptcy. The business partner who tried to steal clients and lost everything in a mysterious IRS audit. The lawyer who tried to blackmail Rich and ended up disbarred and living in a studio apartment in Newark. No, Benjamin admitted. So why would you think Miranda would be different? Because you loved her. Rich's expression hardened. Love is a luxury, Benjamin. Respect is a necessity. Miranda chose to flush both down the toilet for a few hours with a second-rate gigolo. Hugh stepped forward and handed Rich a manila folder. Miranda isn't the only one who's been making poor choices. Rich opened the folder and smiled coldly. It seems Oliver Clark contacted you 2 weeks ago, before the restaurant incident. Benjamin's face went white. Rich, I can explain. He wanted information about my shipping schedules, my warehouse locations, my business partners. Rich's voice remained conversational, but Benjamin could hear the danger underneath. You told him you'd think about it. I never gave him anything, but you considered it. Rich closed the folder. You weighed the pros and cons of betraying me for a man who was fucking my wife. Rich, please. Hugh, show Benjamin what happened to the last person who considered betraying me. Hugh pulled out his phone and showed Benjamin a photo. Even in the dim light, Benjamin could see enough to make him stumble backward. That was Mickey Gorman's nephew, Rich said calmly. He thought he could skim money from one of my operations. We found him in 3 different dumpsters across the city. Benjamin's hands were shaking now. Rich, I never betrayed you. I never gave Oliver anything. You're right. You didn't betray me. You only considered it. Rich stepped closer, which means you still have a chance to prove your loyalty. Ow! Rich smiled, and Benjamin realized he'd just walked into another trap. Oliver Clark has photos. Compromising photos of several women, including Miranda. I want those photos. I don't know where they are, but you can find out. Oliver is desperate, running from Mickey Gorman, facing multiple theft charges. He's going to try to sell those photos to buy his way out of trouble. Rich paused. When he contacts you, and he will, you're going to help him set up the sale. Set it up how? You're going to arrange a meeting with a buyer. Someone with deep pockets who collects that kind of material. Rich's smile turned predatory. The buyer will be me. Benjamin understood immediately. You want me to deliver him to you. I want you to prove that your loyalty to me is stronger than your sympathy for my cheating wife and her lover. Hugh handed Benjamin a burner phone. Oliver will call within 24 hours. When he does, you'll know what to do. As they prepared to leave, Rich placed a hand on Benjamin's shoulder. Benjamin, you've made a lot of money working with me over the years. Don't throw it all away for people who wouldn't piss on you if you were on fire. I understand, Rich. I hope so, because there won't be a second chance. After Benjamin left, Hugh turned to Rich. You think he'll come through? Benjamin values his own survival above everything else. He'll deliver Oliver. Rich looked around the empty warehouse. And when he does, Mr. Clark is going to learn that some debts can only be paid in blood. What about Miranda? Rich was quiet for a moment, thinking about the woman who'd shared his bed for 10 years, who'd known his secrets and vulnerabilities, who'd thrown it all away for a man who was stealing from her purse. Miranda's punishment is going to be watching everything she thought she wanted disappear, starting with Oliver Clark. Chapter 6, The Bait. Oliver Clark sat in his car outside a 24-hour diner in Queens, his hands shaking as he tried to light his 3rd cigarette in 10 minutes. His ribs still ached from Mickey Gorman's message, and the bruises on his face had faded to an ugly yellow-green. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every passing car might contain someone looking for him. His phone rang, a number he didn't recognize. Hello. Oliver, it's Benjamin Williamson. Oliver's relief was palpable. Benjamin, thank God. I need help, man. Rich Hudson is destroying my life. I know. That's why I'm calling. Benjamin's voice was carefully neutral. You mentioned you had insurance. Photos that might level the playing field. Oliver looked around the parking lot nervously. You said you couldn't get involved. That was before I realized how far Rich was willing to go. He's crossed lines, Oliver. Lines that make me uncomfortable. It was exactly what Oliver wanted to hear. I have photos of 6 different women, including his wife. High-quality stuff, very compromising. Anyone I know? Patty Graham, Stacy Finch, Catherine Wagner. Oliver paused. And Miranda Hudson. Lots of Miranda Hudson. Benjamin was quiet for a moment. What do you want for them? 2 million. Cash. That's a lot of money, Oliver. It's worth it. These women would pay anything to keep these photos private. Their husbands would pay even more. I might know someone interested. A collector. Very discreet, very wealthy. Oliver's heart raced. How discreet? The kind of discreet that comes with an offshore account and no questions asked. Benjamin paused. But he want to see samples first. And he want to meet in person. When? Tomorrow night. I'll text you the location. After hanging up, Oliver allowed himself the first smile he'd managed in days. $2 million would pay off Mickey Gorman, Fernando Crawford, and still leave enough to disappear somewhere warm. Maybe Costa Rica. Maybe Thailand. He drove to a storage unit in Brooklyn, where he'd hidden his insurance policy. A waterproof case containing 3 phones, 2 laptops, and dozens of memory cards. Oliver had been careful, paranoid even. The photos were backed up in multiple locations, encrypted and secured. As he drove back to his temporary hideout, a roach-infested motel in Newark, Oliver began planning his escape. 24 hours from now, he'd be rich enough to disappear forever. He never noticed the black sedan that had been following him since he left the diner. Meanwhile, Miranda Hudson sat in her hotel room, staring at her phone. She'd been trying to reach Oliver for 3 days, but all her calls and texts went unanswered. The few friends who still spoke to her confirmed what she already suspected. Rich was systematically destroying both their lives. Her lawyer had been blunt. Rich's prenup was ironclad. She'd get nothing beyond what was explicitly specified, $50,000 and the jewelry she'd owned before the marriage. Everything else belonged to Rich. He could be generous, the lawyer had said. Some men are, especially if their wives don't make things difficult. But Miranda knew Rich Hudson better than that. He wasn't the generous type, and he definitely wasn't the forgiving type. A knock at her door made her jump. She peered through the peephole and saw Hugh Holcomb standing in the hallway, holding a manila envelope. Mrs. Hudson, I need to speak with you. Miranda's hands shook as she opened the door. Hugh's presence never meant anything good. Your husband asked me to deliver this personally. Hugh handed her the envelope and started to leave. Hugh, wait. Miranda's voice was barely a whisper. Is there any way to fix this? Hugh turned back, and for a moment his expression softened almost imperceptibly. Mrs. Hudson, in the 15 years I've worked for your husband, I've never seen him change his mind about someone who betrayed him. Not once. But I love him. It was a mistake. No, ma'am. It was a choice. You made it multiple times over 6 months. Hugh's expression hardened again. Your husband is many things, but he's not a fool. And he doesn't tolerate being made a fool of. After Hugh left, Miranda opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were divorce papers and a single photograph. Oliver Clark entering a storage unit in Brooklyn, taken just hours earlier. At the bottom of the photo, in Rich's precise handwriting, were 4 words, your boyfriend's final mistake. Miranda dropped the photo and sank to her knees, finally understanding that Rich Hudson wasn't just ending their marriage. He was ending Oliver Clark's life, and there was absolutely nothing she could do to stop him. Chapter 7, The Final Game. The warehouse Benjamin Williamson had chosen for the meeting was perfect, isolated, with multiple exits, and far enough from the main roads that screams wouldn't carry. Oliver Clark arrived 30 minutes early, parking his rental car where he could watch the approaches. His paranoia had kept him alive this long. He wasn't about to get careless now. At exactly midnight, a Blacktown car pulled up to the warehouse. Oliver watched as 2 men got out, Benjamin Williamson and someone Oliver didn't recognize. Tall, well-dressed, carrying a briefcase. This had to be the buyer. Oliver grabbed his own case, containing sample photos and a laptop, and walked toward the building. As he got closer, he could see that the buyer was actually quite familiar. It was Abraham Humphrey, Rich Hudson's personal lawyer. Oliver stopped walking. This was a trap. He turned to run back to his car, but found his path blocked by Hugh Holcomb, who seemed to have materialized from nowhere. Going somewhere, Oliver? Hugh's voice was conversational, but his hand rested casually on the butt of the gun tucked into his belt. This is kidnapping, Oliver said, his voice cracking. No, this is a business meeting. Hugh gestured toward the warehouse. Your presence is requested. Inside the warehouse, Rich Hudson stood in the same spot where he'd confronted Benjamin 3 days earlier. But tonight, the lighting was brighter, and additional chairs had been arranged in a circle. It looked almost ceremonial. Oliver, thank you for coming. Rich's voice was warm, almost friendly. Please have a seat. Oliver remained standing, clutching his case. What do you want? I want to discuss your debt situation. Mickey Gorman tells me you owe him $300,000. Fernando Crawford says you owe him another $50,000. The theft charges filed by your former clients will probably result in criminal restitution of, what, Abraham? Approximately $75,000, assuming plea bargains on all charges, the lawyer replied. So roughly $425,000 in total obligations. Rich smiled. That's a substantial sum for a man with no job, no income, and no assets. I have the photos. Yes, the photos. Rich gestured, and Hugh placed a metal case on the table. You mean these photos? Oliver's face went white as Hugh opened the case, revealing dozens of memory cards, phones, and hard drives. You see, Oliver, while you were running around trying to avoid Mickey Gorman, my people were cleaning out all your little hiding places. The storage unit in Brooklyn, the safety deposit box in Manhattan, even the backup drives you hid in your ex-girlfriend's apartment. Oliver's legs gave out, and he collapsed into one of the chairs. Ow! I've been in this business for a long time, Oliver. I know how desperate men think. Rich walked closer. The question now is what to do with you. Rich, please. You see, I have a problem. You've stolen from me. You betrayed my trust. You violated my wife and corrupted my marriage. Rich's voice remained calm, but his eyes were ice cold. In my business, these things require a response. Hugh stepped forward and placed a phone on the table. Mickey Gorman would like a word. The phone rang once before Mickey's gravelly voice filled the warehouse. Rich, my boy, how's business? Excellent, Mickey. I have your boy Oliver here. He seems to have something that belongs to you. 300 grand, plus interest. Call it 350. Rich looked at Oliver. Do you have $350,000, Oliver? Oliver shook his head mutely. Mickey, what's the usual penalty for non-payment in your organization? Mickey's laugh was ugly. Usually involves a blowtorch and some very creative uses for pliers. But seeing as how this is your show, Rich, I'm open to alternatives. Rich was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he smiled, expression that made Benjamin Williamson take an involuntary step backward. I have a better idea. Oliver, you're going to disappear. What? You're going to leave the country. Tonight. Hugh has prepared a new identity for you. Passport, driver's license, credit cards. There's a cargo ship leaving from Newark in 2 hours bound for Singapore. You'll be on it. Oliver's hope flickered. And then you'll work off your debt. The ship's captain is a friend of mine. So is the man who runs the port in Singapore. You'll be working in one of his factories for the next 5 years. Room and board provided, but no salary until your debt is paid. That's slavery. That's mercy. Rich's voice hardened. The alternative is explaining to Mickey why you can't pay what you owe. Hugh placed a packet on the table, passport, identification, and a one-way ticket on a cargo freighter. You have 10 minutes to decide, Oliver. Take the deal, or Hugh drives you to Mickey Gorman's warehouse, and we let nature take its course. Oliver stared at the packet, understanding that he was choosing between 5 years of forced labor or death. What about Miranda? Rich's expression didn't change. What about her? She loves me. We were going to. Rich's laugh cut him off. Oliver, Miranda hasn't tried to contact you in 3 days. She hasn't hired a lawyer to help you, hasn't posted bail, hasn't done anything except cry in her hotel room and blame you for ruining her life. The words hit Oliver like physical blows. That's not true. Hugh placed the phone on the table and pressed play. Miranda's voice filled the warehouse. He seduced me. He took advantage of me. I never wanted any of this. I just want my life back. The recording continued, Miranda's voice breaking as she begged Rich's lawyer for mercy, throwing Oliver under the bus with every word. She's been trying to negotiate a better divorce settlement by claiming you forced her into the affair. Rich's voice was matter-of-fact. Apparently, love has its limits. Oliver stared at the table, all his fantasies of escape and romance crumbling around him. 5 minutes, Oliver. Chapter 8, The Reckoning. Oliver Clark signed the papers with a shaking hand, officially agreeing to 5 years of indentured servitude in exchange for his life. Rich Hudson watched without emotion as Hugh collected the documents and prepared for the trip to Newark. One more thing, Oliver. Rich reached into his jacket and pulled out a small digital recorder. I want you to record a message for Miranda. What kind of message? The truth. About the affair, about the photos, about how you've been using her. Rich placed the recorder on the table. Tell her exactly what kind of man she threw away her marriage for. Oliver looked at the recorder, then at Hugh's impatient expression, then at Rich's cold stare. He pressed record. Miranda, it's Oliver. I'm leaving the country. Rich found out about everything. The photos, the money I took, all of it. His voice broke. I want you to know that I never loved you. You were just convenient. A rich, lonely woman who was easy to manipulate. I've been sleeping with other women the whole time, taking money from all of you. Oliver paused, looking at Rich, who nodded for him to continue. The things I told you about leaving your husband, about starting a new life together, it was all lies. I just wanted your money and your connections. I'm sorry you got caught up in this, but I'm not sorry it's over. Rich turned off the recorder. Thank you for your honesty. An hour later, Rich Hudson sat alone in the warehouse, listening to the recording again. Outside, he was driving Oliver to his new life of misery in Singapore. Benjamin Williamson had been sent home with a stern warning about the consequences of divided loyalty. Rich's phone rang. It was the front desk at Miranda's hotel. Mr. Hudson, your wife asked us to call you. She's asking to see you. She says it's urgent. Rich checked his watch. 3 a.m. Miranda would be desperate by now, probably thinking Oliver had been killed. Perfect timing. Tell her I'll be there in an hour. Rich drove through the empty city streets, thinking about justice and revenge. He'd built his empire on the principle that actions had consequences, that betrayal demanded retribution. Tonight, he would complete the education of his wife and her lover. Miranda answered her hotel room door on the first knock, her face swollen from crying, her hair disheveled. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Rich, thank God. Please tell me Oliver's okay. Please tell me you didn't. Oliver's fine. He's on his way to Singapore, where he'll be working in a factory for the next 5 years to pay off his debts. Miranda's relief was visible. Thank you. I know you didn't have to. Sit down, Miranda. Something in his tone made her comply immediately. Rich pulled out the digital recorder and placed it on the hotel room's small table. Before Oliver left, he wanted to say goodbye. Rich pressed play, and Oliver's voice filled the room. Miranda's face went through a series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, hurt, and finally, a crushing understanding. That's not true, she whispered when the recording ended. He loved me. He said what you needed to hear to keep you compliant. Rich's voice was clinical, just like he said to the other 5 women he was sleeping with. Rich pulled out a folder and spread photographs across the table. Oliver with different women in different hotel rooms on different days. All recent. All during the time he'd been claiming to love only Miranda. Oliver Clark is a con artist, Miranda. A mediocre one, but good enough to fool lonely housewives looking for excitement. Rich gathered up the photos. You destroyed our marriage for a man who saw you as a mark. Miranda stared at the photos, her world completely shattered. I loved him. No, you loved the fantasy he sold you. The idea of being desired, of being special, of being worth a risk. Rich stood up. But you were never special to him. You were just another paycheck. Rich, please. I know I made a mistake. You made a choice. Multiple choices. Every time you met him, every time you lied to me, every time you came home and pretended to be a faithful wife. Rich's voice was cold, and now you get to live with the consequences. Rich placed the divorce papers on the table. Sign them. Miranda looked at the papers through her tears. What about counseling? What about trying to work things out? Miranda, look at me. Rich waited until she met his eyes. In 25 years of business, I have never, not once, forgiven someone who betrayed me. What made you think it would be different? Because I'm your wife. Because you love me. I loved who I thought you were. That woman doesn't exist. She never existed. Rich placed a pen next to the papers. Sign them, and you get what the prenup specifies. Refuse, and I'll make sure you get nothing. You can't do that. Miranda, I own judges, prosecutors, and half the lawyers in this city. I can do whatever I want. Rich's smile was terrifying. The only question is whether you want to make this easy or hard on yourself. With shaking hands, Miranda signed the divorce papers. There's one more thing, Rich said as he collected the documents. You have 24 hours to leave the city. If I see you again, if you contact any of our mutual friends, if you try to sell your story to the media, I will destroy you completely. Where am I supposed to go? I don't care. That's no longer my problem. Rich headed for the door. Goodbye, Miranda. Enjoy the rest of your life. As Rich left the hotel, he felt a sense of completion he hadn't experienced in months. Justice had been served. The betrayers had been punished. The natural order had been restored. Rich Hudson never made the same mistake twice, and he never forgave anyone who crossed him. It was a lesson Miranda would carry for the rest of her very lonely life. Chapter 9. The New Order. 6 months later, Rich Hudson stood in his penthouse office, reading reports from his network of associates. His empire had not only survived the divorce, but had actually expanded. The swift, brutal way he'd handled Miranda's betrayal had sent a message throughout his organization. Rich Hudson was not a man to be crossed. Benjamin Williamson had proven his loyalty and been rewarded with a new restaurant space in Manhattan. Hugh Holcomb had been promoted to head of security for all of Rich's operations. Mickey Gorman had become a more frequent business partner, impressed by Rich's handling of the Oliver Clark situation. The intercom buzzed. Mr. Hudson, your lawyer is here. Abraham Humphrey entered carrying his usual briefcase and wearing an expression of professional satisfaction. Rich, I have updates on our various concluded matters. Oliver Clark, working 16-hour days in a textile factory outside Singapore. His supervisor reports he's an excellent worker, very motivated. At his current pace, he should pay off his debt in approximately 4.5 years. And the photos? All destroyed. Every copy, every backup, every file. The women involved never even knew they existed. Rich nodded. Oliver's collection could have destroyed several marriages and caused significant problems for Rich's business associates. By eliminating the photos, he'd earned gratitude from several powerful men whose wives had been victims of Oliver's scheme. What about Miranda? Abraham's expression darkened slightly. She moved to Phoenix, working as a receptionist at a dental office, living in a studio apartment, driving a 10-year-old Honda. He paused. She tried to contact Patty Graham and Catherine Wagner, presumably to compare notes about Oliver. Both women refused to speak with her. Rich wasn't surprised. The wives who'd been victimized by Oliver wanted nothing to do with Miranda, seeing her as the catalyst for their own humiliation. Miranda had lost not just her marriage, but her entire social circle. Any other business? One item. Fernando Crawford asked me to pass along his appreciation for your handling of the Oliver situation. Apparently, Oliver owed him money for more than just cocaine. Rich raised an eyebrow. What else? Crawford was providing Oliver with Rohypnol. Date, rape, drugs. Abraham's voice was cold. There may have been other victims we don't know about. Rich was quiet for a moment, processing this information. If Oliver had been drugging women, then Miranda might not have been entirely willing in the beginning. But it didn't matter now. She'd made her choices over and over again for 6 months. Crawford wants Oliver to face additional consequences when he returns from Singapore. Tell Crawford that Oliver Clark's punishment has already begun. 5 years of forced labor is just the start. Rich smiled coldly. When he finally comes back to America, he'll find that everyone who ever knew him has moved on. No family, no friends, no prospects. He'll spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, wondering when the next bill will come due. After Abraham left, Rich walked to his window and looked out at the city he controlled. Somewhere out there, Miranda was probably finishing her shift at the dental office, going home to her empty apartment, eating dinner alone while she thought about the life she'd thrown away. Rich felt no satisfaction in her misery, but he felt no pity either. Actions had consequences. Betrayal demanded retribution. These were the fundamental laws that governed his world. His phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize with a Phoenix area code. Rich almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. "Hello, Rich? It's Miranda." The sound of her voice brought back no feelings whatsoever. She might as well have been a telemarketer. "You were told not to contact me." I know, but I wanted you to know that I understand now. About Oliver, about everything." Her voice was hollow, defeated. "You were right. He never loved me. I was just another mark." Rich said nothing. "I keep thinking about our wedding day, about the promises we made, about how happy we were." Miranda was crying now. "I threw it all away for nothing. For a lie." "Yes, you did. Is there any chance, any way we could?" "No." The finality in Rich's voice seemed to break something in Miranda. Her crying intensified. "I'm sorry, Rich. I'm so sorry for everything. I know you are, Miranda, but sorry doesn't rebuild trust. Sorry doesn't undo choices." Rich's voice was emotionless. "You made your bed. Now lie in it." Rich hung up and immediately blocked the number. He made a mental note to have Hugh ensure that Miranda understood the consequences of further contact attempts. As the sun set over the city, Rich Hudson poured himself a glass of 30-year-old scotch and sat in his leather chair, thinking about the future. He was 46 years old, wealthy beyond measure, and completely alone. But solitude was preferable to betrayal. Trust was a luxury he could no longer afford. His empire was built on fear, respect, and the absolute certainty that Rich Hudson never forgave and never forgot. It was a foundation that had served him well and would continue to serve him for whatever years remained. In Phoenix, Miranda Hudson, now Miranda Foster again, sat in her studio apartment, staring at her phone and realizing that the bridge she'd burned would never be rebuilt. She'd traded an empire for a fantasy, a future for a moment of excitement, a man who loved her for a man who used her. The punishment was fitting, and it would last the rest of her life. In Singapore, Oliver Clark collapsed into his narrow bunk after another 18-hour shift, his hands bleeding from the textile machines, his back aching from the constant labor. 4.5 years to go. If he survived that long. He thought about Miranda sometimes, wondering if she ever thought about him. He'd never loved her. That part of his confession had been true, but she'd been kind to him, generous in ways he'd never appreciated. Now they were both paying the price for underestimating Rich Hudson. Some men forgave. Some men moved on. Some men let bygones be bygones. Rich Hudson was not one of those men, and anyone who crossed him learned that lesson too late to do them any good. The reckoning was complete. Justice had been served, and Rich Hudson slept peacefully every night, knowing that in his world, betrayal still carried a price that few were willing to pay.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.